Number 78, which item it was on the agenda?
Oh, I thought I wrote it down.
Good evening, everyone. We're here for a City Council meeting on June 5th, 2017. We will start tonight's proceeding with a roll call and determination of quorum.
Nordstrom. Drew. Solomon. Doyle. Estes. Scott. Laurenti. Wright. Modrick. Roberts. We have a quorum.
Okay, thank you. Next, we'll have invocation by Scott Wiley, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance.
Heavenly Father, we thank you for our great city that you have placed us in. We pray, Father, for your presence and your guidance and direction to be upon this body. We pray, Father, that we will look out for each other's interests, for the interests of our community, for your interests, and that you would receive honor and glory in all that we do and say. Pray, Father, that there be unity and grace. And we thank you for it in Christ's name. Amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, indivisible, with liberty. Thank you, everyone. Now we're on to adoption of the agenda, and I have a couple of requests, and that is to move executive session to the end of the meeting until after the bill list. And also, item number 66 on the agenda should not appear there as it was tabled at committee, so 66 should be stricken. Are there any other changes that need to be made?
Approve as noted.
Okay, we have a motion by Estes, second by Modrick to approve with those two changes. All in favor say aye. Aye. Oppose? Motion carries. All right, we have no speaker requests for general public comment. Everyone who is wanting to speak is on an assigned agenda item. So we'll skip that and go on to non-public. Oh, sorry. I'm going to recognize a couple of long-term employees now. How's that? If I could meet the two chiefs down front for a moment. Good catch, whoever. Well, as I said, it's a pleasure to recognize long-term employees. The employees who are up here tonight and several hundred others in the city have dedicated a good portion of their life to do public service and are here to be recognized. That's best done by the department heads that they work for. So I'm going to turn this over to Police Chief Carl Jiggeris.
Thank you, Mayor. We're here tonight to recognize Rapid City Police Department employee Jolene Ulrich, who has worked for our department for the past 20 years. For the first 10 years of her career, she was in part of our records staff, started as a clerk, was a police service technician, and about 10 years ago, the former police chief, Mayor Allender, promoted her to compliance officer, and she's been in that role for the past 10 years. A compliance officer, we've got a couple compliance officers, but her primary duties at the department and for the city are to monitor the sex offender registry. So clearly a critical component of keeping our community safe. Not always a pleasant component, but she does a very good job to make sure that we are doing a great job of monitoring the sex offenders in Rapid City. She also helps out in other miscellaneous functions. She does background investigations for us when we have new employees coming on board, and she's just always willing to help. So her daughter came down from Bismarck and is here tonight too, so you have to come up and be part of the picture with the mayor and I as well. So Jolene, you want to say anything? No. Thank you very much for 20 years of service. We appreciate it.
Now we'll turn this over to Interim Fire Chief Rod Seals.
Good evening. This evening we recognize Billy Potter for 25 years of service to the City of Rapid City, the fire department. Billy's one of those, he's a lieutenant up at Fire Station 6, which is up on South Mount Rushmore Road, north of Catron Boulevard. He's one of those type of guys we're not going to let go until we figure out how to clone him. He's as solid as they come. He's a guy that never seems to get rattled, always has that nice calm demeanor, and certainly brings that to the emergency scenes of everybody around him. So here's to the last 25 and to the next 20, right? 20. Yeah. Thanks, Chief.
Okay, thanks for putting up with us for a moment. As I started to say, there's no general public comment, so we'll move on to non-public hearing items, items 3 through 66. There are no comment requests for those items as well, so we won't have a public comment period. We'll go on to consent items, items 3 through 56. Amanda Scott.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd like to pull item number 36, and then I'd also like to pull item number 54, simply for the privilege of abstaining from that since it's my employer.
Jerry Wright.
Item 39, please.
Darla Drew.
Item 26.
Okay, so then can we have a motion to approve the consent 3 through 56 with the exception of 26, 39, 36, and 54?
So moved.
Okay, moved by Estes, second by Scott. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed say no. Motion carries. Now on to item 26, to authorize staff to purchase Terex CBI 6800 wood debris grinder system using the National Joint Powers Alliance through Theco Incorporated, St. Michael, Minnesota. Estimated cost $816,186. We'll go to Darla Drew.
Move to approve.
A second by Amanda Scott.
I'd like to retain the floor, please.
Go ahead, you have the
Ask
floor.
some questions for Carl Murbach, please. Hi, Carl.
Good evening.
I'll make this quick and painless. But we have an expensive piece of equipment here. You know, it's $800,000+. So I just have a few questions for you. So the one we have now is, how old is it?
It's approximately 20 years old.
And it's outlived its lifespan?
It's outlived its useful life. For example, in the last 4 to 5 years, we have spent over $400,000 just in upkeep and repairs on the old machine that kind of tell us it's at the end of its useful life and getting to that point where parts are not available.
So where are we getting the new one?
This is actually a machine that is on site. It will do the same purpose as the other one. If you just remember a few years back during Storm Atlas, we had a need for a machine like this. Most of our work had to be contracted out because our machine was not able to handle and keep up. So the purpose for this is we do get in approximately 18,000 tons of yard waste each year that has to be processed because we cannot put that in the landfill. It cannot be burned. So we do have to process that, and the more efficient we can get, the better. And especially if we have a year where we have a lot of storms, just to go out and rent a similar piece of equipment like this is about $500 an hour if we go out to local vendors just to rent a piece of equipment like this. But it has gotten to the useful end of its life, and we have a good opportunity now to replace this. It is a specialty item. It is not anything that you just purchase off of the shelf.
Okay, and so since this can't go into the general landfill, is there a use for this material once you've, crunched it up or whatever?
And
Shredded
that's
it?
exactly what we do. We do create this into compost or to other beneficial reuses that cannot go into the landfill.
And I also read that what used to take 8 hours will now take 3 hours with this.
It's just a newer machine, more efficient. The safety, the other things that are available now with a 20-year updated machine are things that we really can do a lot more with.
Well, when we're spending this kind of money, I just like to ask a few questions. So thank you for your time. That's all I have. I yield.
Okay, we have a motion on the floor for approval of item 26. All in favor of that motion say aye. Aye. Opposed say no. Motion carries. Now on to item 36, which is to authorize mayor to sign an Emergency Solutions Grant Program Local Government Certification for Pennington County Health and Human Services Approval Form. We'll go to Amanda Scott.
Thank you, Mayor. At the Legal and Finance Committee meeting, this looked like an item in which it just needs city support. So I just wanted to make sure and ask you, Mayor, to confirm that this is not obligating any funds, matching funds, or anything else at this time. This is simply just a letter of support to apply for this grant?
That's correct.
Thank you. I can support that. So if any of my colleagues would make a motion?
Motion to approve by Solomon, second by Modrick. All in favor of approval, say aye. Opposed, say no. Motion carries. Item number 39, acknowledge summary presentation of landfill gas production and future beneficial reuse. We'll go to Jerry Wright.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd like to ask Carl to present that program to us, please. And when he's done, I'd like to make a couple comments. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Murbach?
Thank you. Once again, Carl Murbach, Superintendent of the Rapid City Solid Waste Division, and I just wanted to take a couple of minutes of your time this evening to update you on a project that we've been working on for a number of years. A little bit of history, this will keep you awake for a while. Methane and other gases are generated just during the natural decomposition product of the garbage organics at the landfill. In 2008, performance tests that we had to run showed that the landfill exceeded our limits for non-methane organic compounds, or NMOCs, which has put us into a category where we had to install a landfill gas collection system. In 2010, the first phase of the gas collection system was completed on part of the older landfill, cells 1 and 12, or 1 through 11, and a burner was put in, a flare was put in to burn off those gases that were collected. In 1914, we completed our second phase on cell 12. At that time, we put in a small boiler, so we are using some of that gas to heat our shop and our education center. Currently, at this time, we are in our third phase expansion into cells 13, 14, and 17. And again, we are currently under construction. This is just our phases there. The orange or red is our phase 1. To the top is our second phase. Our current phase is in the blue in the center. So what is landfill gas? Landfill gas is comprised about 45 to 50% methane, 45 to 50% carbon dioxide, and less than 1% of a number of other gases. It is not a real efficient gas. It's a very dirty gas, not very high in quality as far as burnability, but it is still something we have to collect. Factors that impact our methane production, one is our organic matter. If you've toured our facility for a number of years, we have put in a process where we are removing a lot of the organics from our household garbage, making that into compost, so we are not putting all of the material into the landfill that would make our gas more effective. Second off is our moisture. Just look at what we've been having over the last couple of months. We are in a very low or semi-arid region, so we do not get a lot of rain and other waters that would mix with that garbage to make that process more efficient. And our landfill gas is very simply collected. We pull a vacuum on the system to where we match that with the generation to what is collected so we can be efficient there. This was a picture taken just a week ago Friday. This is what looks like when it goes into the landfill. A lot of plastic, a lot of dry stuff. Not very efficient for generating landfill gas, but it is still there. It is something we do have. Simple graph, the red dot shows where we are at now. We are just a little over 250, about 260 cubic feet per minute in gas generation. All of our predictions from way back around 2009, 2010 predicted that we would be up around the 450 mark. So we are not quite there yet to be able to generate or get some useful benefit out of our landfill gas, but we are getting close. Just a couple of the options that we are looking at for using that gas when we do get a chance. We can just install a simple electric generator a 1 megawatt generator, which would be enough to run the landfill. The capital cost would be around $2 million, O&M cost of $150. That savings would be around $350. As I mentioned earlier, right now we are at about 250 cubic feet per minute. We need to be up in that range of about 350 to 400 to get to be able to utilize that benefit. Another option is to construct a local pipeline to one of our local industries in the area, just within 3/4 of a mile to the landfill. We do have a couple of industries that do use a lot of natural gas that we could potentially sell our gas to them as a benefit there. Just one example is Sioux Falls has a pipeline that they run out to Poet Energy, an ethanol plant, and that's what they do with their methane gas. One of the last options is to take our landfill gas, convert that into compressed natural gas, be able to use that in vehicles. A lot higher cost to this, a lot of conversion of vehicles and so forth, but again, they're depending on the price of diesel, and this is what that one goes against. Again, again, another option that we want to look at. So in summary, our landfill gas, as far as Rapid City is concerned, we are meeting compliance with the greenhouse gas regulations and our air quality regulations. As mentioned, our landfill gas production has been lower than predicted since the initial 2008 study. We're not quite there for a return on our investment with the expansion that we are doing in our cells 13, 14, and 17 right now. It'll be a little bit later in the year before we know how much of an impact that will be. So again, because of that, our next scheduled beneficial reuse that we will really sit down, take a good look at that cost benefit would be probably next summer in 2018. With that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Jerry Wright.
Thank you, Carl. One constituent asked me to define or explain why we went to all the expense of a landfill gas system just to run a generator. That's not the case. As Carl said, there was a requirement starting in about 1998 where the EPA required landfills to test, and we tested for the first sets in 98, 2003, well under any limit. But for some reason or other, in 2008, we exceeded that, and we had to install the gas. So the gas collection and flaring system was required by EPA. In my opinion, Rapid City has moved to be a sustainable community. It supports sustainability, and one way we could do is this gas that we are flaring, we should use it for beneficial use. And I'm convinced that the best use is a generator, and our power bill out there is about $420,000 a year to run the MRF and landfill, and one generator would take care of about half of that. So I think I encourage my council members that are here next term and this community to keep an eye on this project, to support Carl in the development of this, and if we get information sooner, let's proceed sooner, because it's so important that we're going to be burning gas. Let's burn it. Let's contribute it to our economy and to our benefit, and also take care of the environment. With that, thank you.
Richie Nordstrom.
Thank you, Mayor. A couple of questions, Carl. Have you gotten to the stage of examining the gas or doing testing on the gas? To what I saw a little brief story about what is the contaminants or what is contained within that gas, of methane, carbon dioxide, the other gases that we have in that landfill. Can you describe what that other components are, a little bit more detail for me, please?
Again, the other, as Jerry mentioned, and sorry for the technical term, the NMOCs, those other type of gases. The one thing we did when we first installed our system, I mentioned that we do burn that gas that is coming in. The good news is we are meeting those requirements because we do get a 99% destruction of some of those other gases that are in the system. So that is where we are meeting that compliance. Very simply put, methane gas is 20 times more a stronger greenhouse gas than, say, the CO2 that we generate just from burning that. So we are meeting compliance. We are not quite getting that beneficial reuse that we'd like to see from a waste product.
I like what you're thinking as far as going towards the generator. I do appreciate that. But I'm also concerned about the emissions after it's gone through the generator system and then the air quality after that. So are we going to have to apply scrubbers? Do we have to add additional pretreatment to for the air quality, et cetera?
And this would be we are already part of a Title V air quality permit from DENR, and so this would be part of that. We are already monitoring particulate emissions and other things that are part of that permit. This would just be part of that. Again, just keep remembering that, if we were to just let the methane go, that is a lot worse than the other things that are being generated from that process.
Appreciate the explanation. Thank you, Carl. I'll yield.
Amanda Scott.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd like to make a motion to acknowledge the presentation.
Second by Brad Estes. Back to Jerry Wright.
To clarify the issue on the generators, they're primarily manufactured by Caterpillar, Cummins, and Continental, I believe. And before they can put them online, their emissions have to meet air quality standards, so that will be taken care of by the manufacturer. Thank you.
Okay, motion to acknowledge is on the floor. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Now on to item 54. Approve award of total bid for ready mix concrete opened on May 30th, 2017 to the lowest responsible bidder, Pete Lean and Sons, in the amount of $79,756. And if I can have a motion to...
So move.
Okay.
Move to approve.
Motion to approve by Estes, second by Drew. We'll have one abstention from Amanda Scott. All in favor of that motion, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries with one abstention. And that takes us through the consent items. Now on to non-consent items, items 57 through 66. We have a few speaker requests. One from Peggy Roberts. This is on item number 63, and all the speakers tonight, just so you know, you have 3 minutes when you come up, and if you just identify yourself and then...
My name is Peggy Roberts Titsey. You have to have a sense of humor. I'm a resident in Catron Crossing. I emailed Ward 5 and the Planning Commission about my concern for my value of my property. I have a copy of my covenants, which when I looked at the map, at the time that road did not go through, so it may or may not cover that. But I guess I never envisioned more than twin homes and single homes in that neighborhood. So I am concerned that they are proposing more than twin homes on the street. Does that make sense? So that's my concern, protecting my investment and making sure the covenants are followed.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
And also on item number 63, Mike Gallagher.
Hello, my name is Mike Gallagher. He's actually for items 57, 63, and 85, as they're all similarly related. I'm currently on the Planning Commission, but recuse myself from those items that you see before you tonight. After talking with a few of my neighbors, I took it upon myself to draft a petition outlining my concerns for this planned development. You have a copy of that as an attachment. 17 households in the Catron Crossing area all signed this petition. All of them surprised, concerned, and upset about 11 townhomes being proposed in an area that's less than 1 acre in size. Homes in this area are assessed between $320,000 and $445,000. And people who make that type of investment have reasonable expectations. The most important, which I believe, is development that mimics what is already in place, or even maintaining open spaces. I feel that if the rezoning is approved, it should be done in a way that honors the low-density residential District 1 or low-density residential District 2 guidelines and restricts development of each lot to a single-family or a two-family attached unit, not a three-family or a four-family unit as proposed. I understand that you have a recommendation to approve, but I believe that you will be doing a great disservice to the homeowners in this area if you approve the construction of 10 or 11 townhomes along Nugget Gulch Road. Thank you for allowing me to express my concerns. Any questions?
Thank you very much. Okay, and then we'll close the public comment on these items, and we'll go on to ordinances, starting with item number 57. First reading ordinance 6175, an ordinance amending section 17.06 of chapter 17 of the Rapid City Municipal Code. A request by KTM Design Solutions for Yanni Georgas for rezoning from General Agricultural District to Low Density Residential District 2 for property described as being located southeast of the intersection of Overview Lane and Nugget Gulch Road. This item was continued from the May 15th City Council meeting. Recommendation from committee is to approve in conjunction with appealed initial plan development 17 PD 015. We'll go to Charity Doyle.
I'll make a motion to approve the rezone only without the appealed initial plan development, simply because that one has a separate item, number 85, I believe.
Okay, we have a motion and a second by Brad Estes to approve the zoning only.
The rezone from General Ag to Low Density Residential 2.
Okay.
And then if I may,
Yes, you may.
could we get Vicki Fisher up here? Oh, hi. So while you're coming up, a couple of questions I have are in regard to our city's land use plan for that area, why LDR2 fits within that scheme, and what, taking the other things off the table, the subdivision plan and the overlay, what can be built in that zoning?
So our future land use plan identifies this as low-density neighborhood. And in low-density neighborhood, either low-density residential 1 or low-density residential 2 would be the preferable zoning designations. Rezoning this to low-density residential 2 without the plan development would require that the applicant bring forward a development that could include single-family homes or townhomes. If they are townhomes, each lot has to be a minimum of 4,000 square feet, and all of the setbacks would have to be met. If that is done, then the plan development is not needed. So in this particular case with the acreage before us, you could put 10 units or 5 townhomes with 2 units per townhome on this property without the plan development if they could meet all the setback requirements.
Thank you. I think you summed that up perfectly. Appreciate your time.
Okay, we have a motion and a second for approval of the zoning change on item 57. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, say no. Motion carries. Item 58, to approve second reading and recommendation of ordinance number 6181 regarding supplemental appropriation number 2 for 2017. Recommendation is for approval. Okay, motion to approve by Drew and second by Jerry Wright, and we'll go to Amanda Scott.
Thank you, Mayor. May I just address a quick question to our Chief Financial Officer?
Yes.
Thank you. Pauline, no changes between the first reading and the second reading?
Nope, no changes.
Thank you. I yield the floor.
Okay, motion for approval is on the floor. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, say no. Motion carries. Item 59, first reading ordinance number 6180, an ordinance to update the life safety loan program funding and process by amending chapter 3.28 of the Rapid City Municipal Code. Recommendation is for approval. So moved. Okay, approval motion by Scott, second by Solomon. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, say no. Motion carries. Item 60, first reading ordinance 6182, an ordinance amending section 17.06 of the chapter 17 of the Rapid City Municipal Code. A request by Mike Van Loan for rezoning from flood hazard to low density residential district for property generally described as being located west of West South Dakota Highway 44. Recommendation is for approval.
So moved.
Motion by Estes, second by Roberts. All in favor of that motion, say aye. Opposed, say no. Motion passes with one no from Darla Drew. Item 61. First reading, ordinance 6183. An ordinance amending section 17.06 of chapter 17 of the Rapid City Municipal Code. A request by City of Rapid City for rezoning from no-use district to low-density residential district for property generally described as being located east of Elkvale Road, north of Twilight Drive, west of Reservoir Road, south of Homestead Street. Recommendations for approval. So moved. Motion by Scott, second by Roberts. All in favor say aye. Opposed, say no. Motion carries. Item 62, first reading, ordinance 6184, an ordinance amending section 1706 of chapter 17 of the Rapid City Municipal Code. A request by KTM Design Solutions Incorporated for Celador Ranches Incorporated for rezoning from general agricultural district to low-density residential district for property generally described as being located west of Prestwick Road. Motion, recommendations for approval. Motion by Modrick and second by Drew. All in favor say aye. Opposed say no. Motion carries. Then to Community Planning and Development Services items, we'll go to Alderwoman Charity Doyle.
Thank you, Mayor. Item number 63 is a request by KTM Design Solutions, Inc. for Yanni Jorgas for preliminary subdivision plan for proposed lots A, B, C, and D of Stony Creek South 2 subdivision, generally described as being located southeast of the intersection of Overview Lane and Nugget Gulch Road. Before a recommendation is made, I do have a question procedurally, if I may, for anyone from planning.
Okay.
Okay, and the question is this. I'm just curious as to the order on the agenda, item 63 versus 85. If the subdivision plan is contingent upon the overlay, which order should they be approved in? Is it correct on the agenda? No.
No, the plan development should be first, and
Okay.
then whatever decision you make there, then the plat, the preliminary subdivision plan, should be approved to reflect that density.
Okay. Then if we could get a motion to move this to after 85, that would make a lot more sense.
We have a motion for that action by Jason Solomon, second by Amanda Scott, and that will be to move item 63 to after item 85, correct?
Correct. 85A.
Okay, all in favor of that motion say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Next to Legal Finance Committee items, we'll go to Alderman John Roberts.
Excuse me. Approve final community development block grant CDBG FY 2016 reallocation of contingency funds and FY 2017 allocations. And I recommend approval.
Second.
Second by Lisa Modrick. We'll go to Charity Doyle.
Thank you, Mayor. I am going to be voting no on this, but I'd want to qualify that no. It's not against the grants themselves. I mean, this is something that is really beneficial in the community. But there's one particular item that did not go through the appropriate process, and that's what I have the challenge with. We do have a community investment, community subsidy committee that goes through and studies each of these, similar to what our vision committee did for the last round of projects. And that gives each of these requests that proper vetting. This one was vetted, and it was denied by the committee. So I think it's important that we take those things into consideration and not have that process circumvented. So those are the grounds that I'm going to vote no on this, since we can't pull just one singular item on or off of the approval. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Go to Lisa Modrick.
Thank you, Mayor. I've got a question, if I can, for Ms. Garcia.
Yes. Barb Garcia.
Hi, Barb.
Hi.
So we've been talking about this now for quite some time. And just to follow up with what Councilwoman Doyle had stated, she said she's got a problem with the no on an item that's on that block grant. However, what we're approving is the entire block grant as it exists to include 2 items that we made changes on council. Would that be correct?
Correct.
So at this point then, if we're voting no on the entire block grant, including the 2 items of discussion.
Yes.
And that could be challenging on our block grant. And could you share with me, since there was a statement that it should be going through a committee process, where are we at on that, or did it go through a committee process before you brought it to us?
Yes, before it was brought to you the first time, the committee made their recommendations to council, and council approved their recommendations with the 2 changes.
And so what we're really doing now is finalizing the 2 changes that we had put in place, and this allows the block grant to proceed if the funding comes in, because I think we're still waiting on the funding, and then you can go through that and allow those grants to move forward and get those projects going.
Yes, but you're also, it was brought back to you for a final because we had a 30-day public comment period.
Right.
And so at the Legal and Finance Committee, I let them know that there were no comments received for you to consider for the final.
Mm-hmm. And if we didn't approve the 2 items or this entire block grant, do we go back to committee? Or on the 2 items that we're talking about, do we have to put that back into your fund?
If you deny the whole thing and it goes back to committee already made their recommendation. It's really up to council what you want to do with it at this point. You can approve it as allocated. You can choose to move them. That's truly up to council at this point. We bring it to you with recommendations. It's up to you to decide if you accept those or not. And if not, then you can let us know how you want the money handled.
Thank you. Thank you. That's all I have for now. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Amanda Scott.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd like to make a substitute motion that Alderman Laurenti was trying to make at Legal and Finance Committee meeting. The substitute motion is to approve, see if I can get this right, the Community Development Block Grant with the change of removing the $75,000 from the Freeland Ranch Community Incorporated line number 461 and reallocate that money back into line item 464, which was the City of Rapid City Community Development Demo and Land Acquisition for Small Affordable Housing. And I believe that is where this first $75,000 was moved the first time, was it not, Barb?
Correct.
If I can get a second? I'll second that. Thank you.
We have a second by Charity Doyle.
Thank you. And may I continue with a question or two to Barb? Barb, just to clarify again, the money that we're talking about in this last line, which on the spreadsheet is the 2017 funds, these are potential funds coming from the federal government. The City of Rapid City has not received these funds at all to date.
Correct. We are required by HUD to make a determination based on an estimate because of the timeline that they give us and the delay in the budget being done. We would never make the timelines that we have to if we don't at least come to an agreement on what we're going to fund should we receive the money. In that initial approval was also the wording that should that amount come back either 25% higher or lower. If it's over that, it would come back to council for review. Otherwise, the investment committee would make the adjustments that are below 25%.
And so I like this motion, and I supported it at Legal and Finance when Alderman Laurenti had made it originally, because I believe the investment committee or the subsidy committee, when they made the recommendation, they understood that based on when the block grants do come in, we have another opportunity at that time to take a look at needs. And I really do think that if the city is going to help with affordable housing, then the city itself, the development or the community development part of the city could probably use those funds, and I think we could find the projects for demolition to acquire land for small affordable housing. So I am in full support of the motion as it stands.
Back to Charity Doyle.
Thank you, Mayor. Another thing that the subsidy committee understood, because they had the adequate time to vet the project that we didn't really have, with regard to, and this is I like what Freeland Ranch is doing. I like what they're about. I like what I see going on up there. However, what concerns me, aside from the fact that it was not approved through the committee, is that it was stated that this project up there is contingent upon being granted a TIF. And so to me, if this would be the second round of CDBG funds allocated to this project, and then it falls through if the TIF isn't granted down the road, I just think that sets us up for, committing to something when we don't really even know what we're committing to. I have a concern with that. I'd like to see, that combination may work as part of a larger strategy, but I'm always reluctant on these one-off kind of things that obligate us to something we may not think is a good idea down the road. I yield.
Brad Estes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm not a voting member of that group. I'm the liaison, and I sit and I audit their meetings. And it's a tough job. It's just like our investment deal. There's not a lot of money, and there's lots of hands out. And the group is made up of people who are in the business of nonprofits, of helping, and I think they have a pretty good knowledge of where the needs are and where other philanthropists are giving money and how everything works. And doesn't mean they're always right, and it doesn't mean that you don't have the right to change it. But having sat in on their last meeting and came out with these recommendations, I can support the amended motion. I would not support the original motion. Thank you.
Okay, the substitute motion on the floor is to approve this item minus $75,000 designated for Freeland Ranch, and to move that item back into line item 464. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. All in favor of that substitute motion, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say no. Roll call, please.
Sorry. Estes? Scott? Wright? Modrick? Roberts? Nordstrom? Drew? Solomon? Motion fails 4-5.
Okay, that substitute motion fails. Now we're back to the original motion, which was for approval. We already have that motion on the table, and all in favor of approval of this item, say aye. Opposed, say no.
No.
One more time, roll call, please.
Estes? Scott? Wright? Modrick? Roberts? Nordstrom? Drew? Solomon? Doyle? Motion passes 5-4.
Okay, item is approved. Now we are on 65, which is alcohol beverage license reissuance. City of Rapid City doing business as Executive Golf Course, 1136 Executive Drive, for a retail malt beverage license. Have a motion? Motion to approve by Roberts, second by Wright. All in favor of that motion, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Takes us on to public hearing items 67 through 85. We'll open the public hearing. We have some speaker requests. Starting with Hanny Shaffey.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and council members. I would yield my comments until later after the applicant. Thank you.
Good evening, Mayor and members of the City Council.
We'll recognize Catherine Johnson.
Excuse me, thank you, yes. Yes, and to the Mayor and the members of the City Council, good evening. I'm Catherine Johnson, representing DTH LLC, the developer of TID 54, and I'm here to clarify 2 points that have been discussed over the past few months as this item has made its way through the TIF Review Committee, Planning Commission, Legal and Finance, and then here in front of the Council tonight. My first point is to clarify that the item on tonight's agenda is to approve a revised project plan that reallocates costs to true up the plan with actuals. This is step one of this two-phase process toward cost certification. Step two is a review of each invoice and a determination as to whether it's an eligible expense. Step two is done by Patsy Horton and her team in the planning, city planning. And based upon my experience working with Patsy on her review of TID 38, she's very thorough and will not allow ineligible expenses to be submitted. And personally, I pledge to you that I will be fully cooperative with Patsy's review in step two, and only eligible costs up to the ceiling established by the revised project plan will be certified. And this suggestion that we're somehow trying to sneak ordinary subdivision costs into this revised project plan, it just really doesn't make sense. The subdivision plats for this were filed in March and June of 2005, which was months before the TID 54 was approved, or filed rather, and several years before the work on the Northridge water infrastructure under this TID was designed and constructed. And none of the public improvements that were funded through TID 54 were required for the plats of that subdivision. And in addition, you've heard that the costs for professional services are too high. And you might recall that Doyle and I provided a memo about a month ago highlighting the reasons for these design costs. And Hanny Shafi is here tonight and will speak to describe broadly the circumstances of that design process and answer questions. But please keep in mind that all the costs for professional services will be scrutinized by Patsy and her team during step two. So tonight, I really would ask you to approve step one, which is the revised project plan, which will allow us to move to step two, which is justifying the eligible costs. And my second point is to review precedent on approving revised project plans that reallocate budget to match costs. In the last 10 years, the Council has approved reallocation in 18 revised project plans, and I didn't find any record of any such request being denied. And in 9 of those 18, interest savings were reallocated to construction and design. But most relevant are the 3 that were approved within the last 8 months. In February, 1 was approved, 2 were approved, transferring interest. The city's Cabela's TID 54, Cabela's Economic Development, TID 38, Heartland Retail Center. And in October, this council approved reallocation of interest for TID 70, which is the Highway 60 server. And considering that there's no written policies or procedures or standard operating procedures that the city uses for TID administration, precedent is the only thing that developers have to look to try to get some notion as to the practices. So tonight I'm asking that TID 54 be treated like all the other requests for cost reallocation, and I will be available for questions.
Thank you. Hanny Shafi.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and council members. I'm speaking also on the same item. In regard to the professional fees, I personally was involved in the establishment of the TIF as the TIF went through, and then other professional engineers within our organization who are no longer within our organization were involved in the design. And but I was involved in some of the coordination with the city and the design of that project. As far as the design fees, I really have not looked at the submitted invoices or what have you for the certification, which will be scrutinized through city staff and through our office working with city staff at the certification stage. But the design included a booster station, a water main to a reservoir, and then a 12-inch water main along Bunker Drive, then a road along the water main to a new tank, which is the new elevated tank, which is the Northridge elevated water tank at the north side of town. The road design was challenging. You know, to get from point A to point B, as you know, we got to get from the bottom of the hill all the way to where the tank is located. Those points have certain elevations, and the road grades have to be designed in such a way to meet as much as possible the city requirements. We have worked with city staff to do an alignment that was done late 2008, and that alignment was almost complete, and then there was a change within city staff in which they requested that we change the alignment and minimize the grade further, which required a different alignment. And that different alignment was about roughly close to 14% grade. The maximum grade that is, you know, in the city standards is 12%. And so therefore they requested that we change the alignment again to a different alignment to get as much as possible, as close as possible to the 12% grade. And we did so, and we came in within like 1.5%. So it was like about 13.4% grade on that road. And that road was almost finalized design-wise. And all those roads and alignments required drainage along those roads. As you know, the steepness of the hill, it needed to be drained properly so it will be stabilized. And the road width was 12 feet, gravel road. And after the design was complete, it was requested to be changed to 20 feet. And at that time, it was agreed between the owner and the city that, you know, might as well lay out the road to fit a future subdivision, which is really going to be hard to recover any cost from any road improvements for a subdivision there because the ground is really steep and the lot number is going to be very limited because of the access. And this included also a detention pond that was to be redesigned to accommodate the runoff from the newly graded and areas which has a lot of erosion that needed to be, the water needed to have some storm quality, which required the detention pond to be redesigned. I'm available for any questions that you may have. Thank you.
Thank you. Scott Sumner. Also on item 78.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm an attorney, and I represent DTH. Try not to repeat what's been discussed. First, on the subject of the concerns about delay, it's important to realize that in this particular tax income district, the developer has, in fact, as is expected and required, completed all of the improvements that were described in the original project plan. There was one change from the original project plan, which included a water well that was, at the city's direction, revised to remove the water well and put in this new water reservoir or the water tower in its place. But with that change, which was done, I think, back in 2008, there have been no other changes to the public improvements in the project plan. There was a cost certification in 2012 that was not represented by the applicant as being a final cost certification. At that point, the developer had not received the final invoice from the city for work for the design, construction, administration during the construction of the booster plant. That invoice wasn't actually received until 2014. But the most important thing here is that there's no harm, financial harm to anyone from any perceived delay in the presentation of this request for reallocation. There's no extra interest costs as a consequence. There are no extra capital costs as a consequence. They're incurred by any party. This is simply a matter of trying to avoid putting form over substance and to bring the paperwork, if you will, into alignment with reality. That is, this work was done some time ago, and now we're just trying to finalize the cost in step one, as Ms. Johnson said, which was to seek a reallocation of the project plan to put the budget items in line with actual costs. That's all that's requested here. put the budget items in line with actual costs. And there has been some concern expressed that maybe there should be a distinction drawn between those budget items that are, say, capital costs and those budget items that might include interest expenses. But the controlling state statutes make it clear that project costs include interest expenses, as well as the capital costs, and as well as professional services for such thing as design and construction administration. So to request a reallocation of interest expense to cover other project costs is not to ask for anything out of the ordinary or unusual. It's just a normal reallocation. Again, as Ms. Johnson pointed out, you've done it approximately 9 times that she's been able to identify. So it's a normal business. The cost certification that the developer submitted in 2012 was never intended to be final. It's not represented by them to have been final. We're not aware of any written policies or practices that have been violated. We're not aware of any written time limitations that would constrain our ability to present this at this time. We're simply requesting that the paperwork be allowed to proceed to bring actual costs into conformance with reality, the project plan into conformance with reality. Thank you.
Thank you. Now the next speaker request from Joy McCracken on item 79.
Good evening. Joy McCracken, Executive Director for NeighborWorks. And I first would like to thank everyone for their support in getting the Village on Monroe to this almost final stage. I would like to also thank the staff. They've been very patient, and they've been very patient with me explaining the whole process, and I did learn a lot through the process. If the TIF is awarded, the proceeds, we will be using proceeds from the project to provide each homeowner with a $12,000 down payment loan. This loan will have a 0%, it will have no payments, and it will be due on sale. The buyer can use this as a sufficient down payment, which will allow them to get a better interest rate, and they will also allow them to have lower mortgage interest premiums. This is all to keep the payment at 30% of their income or less. When the property is sold, that loan is repaid and available to the next buyer. I've also learned through this process that building small homes, when the square footage goes down, the cost per square foot goes up. In reviewing the construction costs with the guys, I learned that the bathrooms and the bedrooms are the most expensive rooms in the home. Our 2-bedroom units have 2 full baths, and the 1-bedroom unit has 1.5. Typically, this high-cost area is spread across the whole home to the lower-cost areas, such as large living rooms and large family rooms. These small rooms do not have family rooms and living rooms, large living rooms. Many of the costs for a $140,000 home are the same as a $240,000 home. The basic electrical panel is the same for a small home or a large home. Water and sewer hookups are the same for a small home or a large home. Soil testing is the same for a small home or a large home. Delivery charges on material is the same for a small home or a large home, just to name a few. In preparing for this project, we learned there's over 10,000 families in Rapid City with incomes of $35,000 or less. If 68% of these families own homes, the same as the higher income levels, there's 3,200 families in Rapid City that can become homeowners. And we're ready to start building these 5 homes and putting families into home ownership. Thank you very much, and I'll be available for additional questions.
And our last, our last speaker request from Ken Coleman on item 85.
Use this, the projector.
You can just point with this.
Okay.
And then you can write up here if you want to write on it.
Okay, thank you. All right, my name is Ken Coleman, and I live at 6036 Nugget Gulch Drive. I thank you, Mayor and council members, for hearing me speak tonight. I don't probably sound as intelligent as the rest of these people because I sell fireplaces and I'm in the Army National Guard, so I don't have a lot in the planning committee rezoning knowledge as I wish I did. My concern is my house is right on the edge. Well, I got the eraser on, but anyways, where the arrow is at, I'm right on the edge of where those fourplexes and threeplexes are going to be built. I purchased the house for $400,000 and it was just appraised at $425,000. My property tax is over $5,000 a year. My concern is if I get relocated, if I get moved with my company, or if I get deployed and my wife has to move, my concern is that if I try to sell my house and it's not worth that, I'm going to be out what I invested in this property. I was told by my realtor, which I don't think matters at all, but he said that it wasn't able to be built on that. If it was, it would be one single family home. I know that another builder, actually the builder that actually is building this, told one of the other homeowners that they would never build along or on the other side of the street. Now that's hearsay, rezoning, there's opportunity. I totally understand that. I think the concern is that fourplexes and triplexes next to properties of that value, I guess I don't understand that. I don't know if there's, I get the zoning and the requirements, but I guess I don't know if there's anything in there about cost and what it does to depreciate the other values in the neighborhood. I would like to know more about that. I don't know if there's anything in rezoning that covers that. Also, if they are fourplexes and they have one car garage, it's a single road that you can actually park on the street or you get ticketed. And I don't know, that doesn't seem like there's another parking area. And most people have two cars these days, so I don't know if it's something that when the people come, where are they gonna park, or friends? I mean, most of the homes there have big enough driveways that you can have quite a few vehicles parked there. Those are just questions that I don't know how to, ask correctly according to ordinances. But my concern is that, the value of my property, as long as I'm assured that this doesn't affect it, and that if I was to sell or if I'm going to pay over $5,000 a year in property taxes, that, it's worth it. That's my concern. I thank you for listening to me.
Thank you. That takes us to the end of our public hearing. Now on to consent public hearing items 67 through 77. What is the council's wishes on these items?
Move to approve the balance.
Okay, we have a motion to approve by Amanda Scott. Second by Darla Drew. All in favor of approving the consent public hearing items, say aye. Aye. Opposed, say no. Motion carries. Takes us on to item 78. To approve a request by Doyle Estes and Kathy Johnson for DTH LLC for Resolution 2017-019 approving revision number 2, project plan reallocating project costs for tax increment district number 54 for property generally described as being located north of Mall Drive and west of Haynes Avenue. This item was continued from the 15th of May City Council meeting. Recommendation from council is to approve. We'll go to Amanda Scott.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm pulling up the chart here. I'd like to make a motion to allocate, as intended, the $675,000 underneath financing cost section, contingency cost, water reservoir, and move that up to the water reservoir line, which is roughly about line 5 down. That one, the first plan, or the 2008 revision plan, had allocated that $675,000 at that time for that water reservoir. Oh, I'm sorry, can I get a second? And I'd like to retain the floor.
I think you should take one more run at that motion.
Okay, I'd like to make the motion to approve a reallocation of only the water reservoir, $675,000 from under contingency cost up to the water reservoir line as shown on this form. If I could get a second, I'd like to retain the floor. Okay, I'd like to retain the floor.
Floor is yours.
Thank you. The reason that I can support that is another council did already recognize that those funds were allocated at that time to the water reservoir. The issue I have with this is that the $575,494.62 that is being taken out of finance interest and being reallocated or being requested to be reallocated to professional costs is actually taking interest, finance interest money, that if this TID had been extended out the full length in which it had been intended, the developer would have paid those financing costs. Since the TID is coming in, incremental taxes is paying it off early, the developer really hasn't incurred those financing costs. So we have 3 taxing jurisdictions that are giving up those tax dollars to pay for that infrastructure. One is the city, one is the county, and the third one is the schools. And so in my mind, to take financing interest costs that should be a savings or go back to those 3 taxing entities and to actually move them to cover capital costs within the project, even though it doesn't change the total project cost, that financing interest is put into the plan to safeguard and make sure the developer, in case they incur those financing interests, get reimbursed for that. I'm having a hard time with these, that the total project includes the finance interest, and as stated tonight, the developers are now anticipating being able to come into the city council and reallocate based on the total project cost. And I find it a little, I'm trying to still get through the three conversations that were brought up tonight, because in one breath they're saying, City Council, please use everything based on precedent that has been set in the past. Oh, but by the way, when we finalized in 2012, we really didn't finalize. Well, based from our city finance officer, based on precedent, when you turn in your cost, that is finalizing your cost. So it seems to me we're being asked to kind of stay with precedent of what city councils have done in the past on one piece, but let's disregard this other piece. So it seems like everybody's trying to come up with their best interest. And so as a city council, I think it's our responsibility to really take a look at these TIDs. And when we're being represented with a reallocation, we really need to study and see what was originally approved, what the dollars were originally intended for, and then make the best decision and start setting those recommendations or those expectations to the developers of what we expect the money to actually be used for. So I will not be supporting this reallocation as it is today. Thank you.
Okay, we'll go to Brad Estes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll be abstaining from discussion and voting on this topic. Thanks.
Okay. We're going to go to City Attorney Joel Landine.
Thank you, Mayor. Based on Alderman Scott's motion and comments, I think I need to make something clear from my memo or the letter I sent to the council prior. I don't think anybody is disputing, including staff, the $650 for the water tower, that they be reimbursed for that, because it was included in a previous project plan amendment. This is just moving it. I actually excluded that number from the total when I did the math. So I just want to be clear that when in my memo I focused on the 84,000, but that and the finance officer or the public works director can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think nobody disputes the 650 or whatever it is for the water tower, that is a reimbursable expense. In fact, I think at our meeting, the finance officer indicated she didn't even think that the amendment for that was necessary, that they could pay for that based on the previous amendment. But I just wanted to be clear that the staff is not opposing that portion of it.
Okay, thank you. Jerry Wright.
I'd like to make a motion we approve the request by Doyle Estes, Kathy Johnson for reallocation of project costs and continuation to step 2. if I may hold the floor.
Okay, we had a motion and a second then by John Roberts. Go ahead, you have the floor.
Thank you. I truly trust that our staff and Catherine will do a good job of scrutinizing this and come back with a good, honorable solution to the problem. To be real honest with you, I spent a great deal of time today, along with another member of the council, going over this, and this is a very complex deal. But the thing I need to remember, and the community needs to remember, is the things that are being improved or paid for in this were all public improvements. They were not for the development or this developer. And the other thing is we reallocate costs from reservoirs to pumping stations to streets to lines and whatever. Why can't we move finance? I think it's part of the project costs, and I'm not going to get hung up on it. If the project costs, if the actual capital costs are less, and the interest costs are less, and they could be allocated to pay off some of the other needed or added expenses, I'm for it. But I think we're going to get an answer back from staff in the near future when we take the final action. Thank you.
Richie Nordstrom.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm going to go to the city attorney, or maybe I should go to the city finance officer first. The question has to do with the decision that we made, or someone made, about the final being in 2012. Is that written someplace? How does that process come about so it's a final, we make the final determination and I'm understanding it was in 2012, so help me understand that part of it.
Finance Officer Pauline Sumption.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. In 2012, they came in with cost allocations for all of the project line items that had been outstanding. So at the first certification in 2008, they certified the parks, the $500,000 check that they wrote to the city for the parks. There was something else that they certified plus some interest costs, and I can't remember that off the top of my head. That left 4 line items within the project line items, like the water main, the grading over the water main, the booster station, and the reservoir, and the professional services that go with it, left to be certified. In 2012, I'm going to make a short story long a little bit. There's some emails back and forth. Doyle asked me how much money I was sitting on because the bank was looking for money because I had already paid off that first certification. At that time, I had a minimal amount, and he wanted me to start paying, and I said, well, I need a certification before I can start paying. I can't just start paying the bank. And so there was acknowledgement in another email that I told him that he needed to reallocate the costs at that time. Well, instead, he came in and certified those 4 remaining project line items, and so in my mind, it was done because there were no more project line items to be certified. And we did not allow for phasing certifications except with an amendment where he could come in and certify those first few costs because the bank was accruing interest on those. And so because of that and everything else that had happened up to that point, that's where, in my mind, it was final because there was nothing left to certify. All the projects had been certified at that point, had some cost allocated to them.
And if I may add a little bit to that as well.
Please.
There's a provision in the developer's agreement that talks about certification. And of course, it's our belief that made clear that the cost should all be certified at once and paid at once. I'm sure that Mr. Sumner could come up and give you an argument different than that. And I will say now we have altered the language so it's very clear that the costs all have to be certified, frankly, because of situations like this. And they have to be certified within a certain period of time. I will say specifically for this one, if you look at the history of it, we had discussions about certification and that we couldn't pay until all the projects are completed with Mr. Estes, which is why we did one of the earlier amendments, which broke the projects into phases. Because if you look at the amendments of the project plans, a lot of the amendments were extending the dates for the improvements to be completed. So one of the improvements, I can't remember which one specifically, some of them were done, and it was clear the other projects weren't going to be done for a few years. So he approached us and wanted us to start paying, which was a perfectly reasonable request. So we looked at it and said, but we can't pay because you can't certify all the project costs. So we worked with him to then amend the agreement and separate it into 2 phases, and we started and certified the first phase and started paying on it, so we wouldn't be paying interest, and so we could start making payments on those, because we knew at that time it was going to be several years before the other public improvements were completed. So on this project, I mean, we had a discussion about this very issue. So, you know, was there a specific letter saying this was your final certification, or him making that statement? No. I mean, you have to look at the circumstances, and based on the circumstantial evidence, I guess, try to draw a conclusion from what everyone's understanding was. But it certainly was the city's understanding, based on that exchange, that Mr. Estes was waiting for the final costs on the water line and things, which he is requesting an increase on, and that once he certified it, those were the final costs for that at that point in time. So certainly, when staff looks at it, now 5 years after these improvements were completed, now there is, you know, hundreds of thousands of dollars in additional costs. It raises the question, well, where was that? Where was that? That had nothing to do with the invoice that was billed in 2014. Where were those costs in 2012? Why were they not certified at that time? That's where staff, when, you know, at the Legal and Finance Committee, it was asked why staff had a concern. I mean, that is one of the areas of concern why staff has questioned this amendment.
Thank you for that explanation. Mayor, I know I'm out of time, but I've got a couple of other questions. If I can yield to somebody else and come back to me, or however you want to handle it. If I'm out of time, I'm out of time, but
If someone wants to yield, they can.
Yeah. Doesn't sound like it, so.
Okay, we'll go to Jason Solomon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Alderman Nordstrom, if I have any time remaining, you can have it, but I don't like to give up my valuable airtime either. If I can direct a question to the Finance Director, please.
Yes.
So we certified this in 2012. Can you tell me, is there a history of us going back and reallocating costs after a certification, like an official certification of total costs?
Not when all of the project line items have been certified already. We've gone back where there may be they've certified a phase, but they haven't certified their second phase, and we've gone back and reallocated costs then for those second phase projects. After the reallocation, then they come in and certify. But we've never had them certify every line item within the project plan and then come back for a reallocation.
And so it's sounding to me like in 2012, when we certified, it was not clear that was it. Is that?
I believed it was it, because I had told them earlier that if they were going to exceed those, that they needed to request a reallocation.
So that's what you believe. I just want to make sure.
That's
Do
how
we
I
have
would
it
treat.
documented that that's what it means when we certify that it's?
Other than what Joel said about where it says in the developer's agreement that you will certify when the project is completed, that's really the only other thing. Most typically, we don't get a statement saying that it's certified. However, we will have the documentation that all the project line items have been certified to some extent. We've had some developers that actually have opted not to reallocate and just certify so that we could start paying the banks at that time. That was not the case in this instance.
Okay. Well, you know, I want to be fair here, and I want to make sure that we get the actual costs right. For one, to the taxpayers and also to the developers. Joel, in your memo to City Council that's attached in the agenda here, you did say that we could verify that $84,660 for a booster station in 2014 was something that we could justify if we decided to reallocate any sort of cost. Is there anything else in there that?
Well, I mean, like I said, I don't think anybody's disputing the cost of the water tower. I mean, that bill certainly came in after the tax increment district was certified. It was for design costs for an allowed improvement under the tax increment district. So, I mean, I wouldn't dispute that. I mean, you can still look at it and say it's been 3 years they've had that invoice, so why are we doing this now? But I mean, yeah, it was for an allowed cost, and it was a design fee, and we know it's legitimate because we designed the project and oversaw the work, so we know it was for an allowed cost.
Okay, that's all I have for now. Thank you.
Lisa Modrick.
Thank you, Mayor. So a couple of what I think were outstanding statements just in the discussion that we've had back and forth that allow the motion to be protected by the step 1, step 2, as Ms. Johnson has stated, is that what we make the motion on and do, if we approve so tonight, that allows us to finally move forward. It allows the staff to re-review and audit TID 54, while it's also allowing the developer to re-review and audit or self-audit that as well, and make sure that those invoices are combined and consented and can finalize this. Because the one statement that is, I believe, bothersome for a lot of us up here is that it's an assumption certification, and there's no document or anything that really makes it except for an assumption that it's certified, when in fact in 2014 the city did find, possibly through a review or re-audit, that there was an additional $84,660 that remained. So that re-review and audit is our opportunity today to make TID 54 complete with a true certification. And I believe we have the developer and staff and our staff that has the project on their desk can combine and say what does fit into this adjustment and what does not, and we can throw out what doesn't fit and move on and close TID 54 with perhaps an actual document of certification. If we're not doing that with our TID administration, then we've got a problem right up here that I hope we can solve that problem tonight with all the other TIDs that are previous to us and coming ahead of us. So it is my belief that this is a good motion on the floor because it's a step 1, step 2. The final step is certification complete, and then we all get to put to bed TID 54. So I can definitely support this motion. Thank you.
Okay, as I understand it, the motion is for approval. Nothing more, nothing less. Am I reading that correctly? Yeah, this isn't the final approval of the whole process. It has another step. Okay, so the motion is for approval of this item on the agenda. It's number 78. Charity Doyle.
Thank you, Mayor. May I ask some questions of Patsy Horton?
Yes.
Since she's here, and she carried about 3 feet of files with her, I don't want her to not have anything to do this evening. Hi, Patsy. One of the questions I have that comes up is stems from Joel's comments on the phases. Was there ever a cap set at the number of phases? Was it agreed that it was 2 phases, which would play into Ms. Sumption's assumption?
How about if I just show you the language in the existing agreement?
That'd be better, thank you.
Maybe. So this is the language, and identifies about line 5, 6. Phase 2 will include the balance of the improvements which are required to be completed by December 31st, 2008. Upon completion of a phase, the developer will certify.
She did say phase 2. So phase 1 was done by December 31st of 2007. Phase 2 by December 31st of 2008. So that was a signed agreement. Okay, so it's not really an assumption. I mean, it was something valid. We had an agreement, those costs were submitted, those line items closed out, certified, case closed, as a staff person would think. So thank you for clarifying that. You may not want to address this, but if you would, my question is, since we've never done this before, what kind of can of worms does that open up for the city? With regard to, I get the sense that the city is heading in a direction where there probably are going to be some more TIFs created to help address some of the city needs versus affordable housing, these types of things. And if this precedent is established, what kind of concerns would come up from a staff perspective?
And can you specifically identify which precedent you're talking about?
Well, once an agreement has been satisfied, the costs have been certified, and now, I mean, I know if I had $613,000 sitting on the table 5 years ago, I certainly would have asked sooner. So I'm just curious about that. What kind of precedent does that set, and where do, you know, if we do that, should we have some kind of criteria? Because how long can we give it before somebody can come back and say, oh yeah, by the way?
In our current agreements, the city attorney specifically identifies a certain time frame where, you know, as soon as the costs are done, you have to certify, I believe it's 180 days, so that we can address this very issue.
Okay. So this could really blow the roof off of that. And how, I know you're very busy. I've seen your office. How is this going to affect you?
Well, whether you approve this or not, we're still going to go through every invoice. And, you know, depending on what we find, and, you know, there are always just a couple questions that, you know, follow based on, you know, what we see. But we're still going to go through all of those invoices, and if there are questions about, you know, any kind of eligibility, we'll identify those. And just so everybody knows, there is one other step not associated with any certification. It's the developer's agreement that will actually identify what these proposed changes would be. So there's really an extra step that nobody has referenced yet tonight. So after this, you would see on the agenda a developer's agreement similar to the other 4 amended developer's agreement to specifically implement this revision 2. I would hope that in the meantime, before that agreement shows up on the agenda, we would have some better numbers for you. So
okay, so then the motion tonight on the floor currently is actually irrelevant if you're already doing the work. So would you'd have to bring the things that you find up, and we can approve them as a unit to make sure that they do shore up to those actual costs?
We would work with the developer to make sure that, you know, if there are questions that we don't have the paperwork, or there's still some outstanding issues that we think need to be resolved.
Okay, so we're not committing to a dollar amount tonight?
Other than the maximum amount that would be allowed for each line item.
Okay. Thank you very much, Patsy.
City Attorney needs to clarify something else, or is that old? Okay. Jerry Wright.
Thank you. As I said earlier, this is going forward to where I think it would be finally certified and closed. It is, I want to reemphasize that that's what we're trying to be fair to all parties. That's important. And I went through the documents today at great length, and I can see where there are issues on both sides of the wire. And I think that, for instance, in the summary of costs, from one in the staff report and one in the letter we got it from Public Works and Planning and Finance, the format's different. Extremely difficult for us as the council members to figure it all out. So I do encourage the council to vote for this reallocation. Let our staff and the developer go over the costs and certify it, and then we'll handle it in a final act. We have some lessons to learn from this process. We have been, in my opinion, I'll say it this way, very sloppy and careless. And I think we need to put together some ironclad rules we work by and we stand by. And we've had issues before. We've lost bonds. We've lost this because we didn't have the accountability we needed. Let's straighten it out. But this issue needs to be resolved. And the only way to do it fair and square is reallocate the costs, allow that, and let the staff and owner or developer come up with a final number. Thank you.
Okay, motion on the floor is for approval of item 78. All in favor of that motion, say aye. Aye. Opposed?
Here.
Motion passes with 1 no from Amanda Scott. Item number, and one abstention from Brad Estes, correct? Item number 79 is to approve resolution number 2017-030, a resolution creating the Village on Monroe Tax Increment District, and a resolution approving the project plan for property generally described as 612 Dilger Avenue. Recommendation was for approval. I have a motion on item 79. We have a motion to approve by Drew and second by Wright. Seeing no discussion, all in favor of...
Hey, I only have 2 of these left. I'm going to milk them for all they're worth. Joy, if I may. It was the first night that I heard you say anything about the $12,000 loan. My understanding was always that this TIF was going to offset the land cost, so it would just not be in you understand what I'm saying?
I
It
do
is getting
understand
like,
what
okay.
you're saying.
So could you explain that a little bit?
If we were to just lower the purchase price, the property will appraise. So if you lower it, they can sell it, they're going to take that $12,000 with them. You only have one family, and you're done. By working with the loan, they pay back, and you can help the next family. So it's a method to assist more than the first 5 families.
But if they're paying it back, then it's not really reducing
It reduces
it more affordable.
Yeah, it reduces their mortgage amount by $12,000. So it reduces their payments. And when you have and that's a larger down payment than lenders would require. Usually they only require like a 3% down. This is like an 8 or 11% down. So when they come to the table with that large of a down payment, they can get the best terms and conditions on their loan, and that's how that helps them.
And the repayment is only when it's sold.
Right,
Got
only
it.
when it's sold. They don't
Okay.
make any payments during the time they own the home.
Clears it up. Thank you very much.
Brad Estes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My question might have to be for Pat. Patsy, were you involved in this TIF?
Yes, I was.
Okay, so this TIF, it spells out specific costs of bringing water, and there are specific items that this TIF is supposed to take care, the specific costs involved in developing this lot is supposed to be paid for by the TIF. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, and I assume that there's other work in the lot development that they're going to be doing that probably isn't covered in the TIF.
Correct.
Okay, so, but it's extremely specific, and then each one of those work items that's going to be covered by the TIF are in a line item with an estimated cost.
Correct, and the only, just so you know, the only thing that's covered with the TIF is the cost of the land plus the required appraisal.
That's it?
That's it.
Okay. All right. So then there's no, so on this one, there's no question as to certify, there's no additional, we won't have an instance that was just spoke of on the earlier.
Correct.
Okay. Because my only comment where I was trying to get to is for these TIFs to work and for, in my mind, for the TIFs to work and for them to be fair to the public, is that if they do work well, that they do get paid off early and the interest cost is less to the taxpayer, and we're not, in my mind, we're not supposed to go back to the taxpayer and take that savings away from them. So, thank you. You answered my question.
John Roberts.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Patsy, since you're up there, can you tell me what the TID boundaries are on this proposed TIF?
It's the one lot that will be created, that will be split into 5. It's just the corner. It's an existing lot right now. As soon as the proposal goes through, there'll be a plat that moves forward. There's already been preliminary approval, so it'll be split into 5 lots.
And I find that unfortunate. I wish we are doing this, but by doing this, I would like to have seen those TID boundaries be stretched out in North Rapid, because there's quite a bit of growth north of there, and if we'd have stretched it out, we could have paid it off pretty much instantly with anything that would have been built up there. And then also that would have gave the opportunity of anyone else wanting to come in and do a TIF within that boundary to be able to do it. And that's one of my biggest issues that I've had with this whole TIF all along, is the fact that we're doing it on one city lot. And the biggest reason probably isn't because of NeighborWorks. The biggest reason is, I don't know how many of you knew that the state of South Dakota tried to change the TIF guidelines in the last legislative session. They are really looking at what they are considering in Pierre to be municipalities that are abusing TIFs. And when we put a TIF on one piece of property for one project, I think we're pushing those boundaries, and that's why I said I'd like to see this TID boundary extended so other projects could have came in the area. And, you know, just one of the reasons I'm voting against this. But, you know, I think when we're looking at affordable housing, especially using TIFs for affordable housing, we need to look at areas where we can build more than 5 units. So, thank you.
Patsy, do you need to clear something up?
I would just like to add that this particular TIF is not, the school district is not being funded. The school district's portion of the tax increment that will be lost is not being funded by the rest of the state. It's a localized funding. It will cost, over the life of this TIF, $2 per $200,000 in property valuation. One of the issues with the economic TIFs is that the entire state pays for that school district portion. This particular TIF is only the residents of our Rapid City School District. It's not a statewide TIF, which is an economic development TIF. So there's just a little confusion, I think, with my understanding of the state's concern. So I just want to clarify that.
Thanks for clearing that up. Do we have a motion on the floor? Oh, Darla. We have a motion for approval on the floor of item number 79. All in favor of that motion, say aye. Aye. Opposed, say no. One motion passes with 1 no from John Roberts. Item number 80. Second reading ordinance 6173, an ordinance amending section 1706 of chapter 17 of the Rapid City Municipal Code. A request by Mandy Schmierer for Penny Lind for a rezoning from office commercial district to general commercial district for property generally described as being located southwest of the intersection of Neal Street and Bernice Street. Recommendation from committee is to approve in conjunction with Plan Development Design, file 17 PD 016. Motion by Scott and a second by Modrick for approval. All in favor of approval say aye. Aye. Opposed say no. Motion carries. Item 81, second reading ordinance 6174, an ordinance amending section 1706 of chapter 17 of the Rapid City Municipal Code. A request by KTM Design Solutions Incorporated for DKEA LLC for a rezoning from General Agriculture District to Low Density Residential District 1 for property generally described as being located north of the intersection of Bethpage Drive and Prestwick Road. And committee recommends approval. Motion by Modrick and a second by Drew for approval. All in favor of that motion say aye. Aye. Opposed say no. Motion carries. Item number 82. Second reading ordinance 6176, an ordinance amending section 1706 of chapter 17 of the Rapid City Municipal Code. A request by KTM Design Solutions Incorporated for Sitkra LLC for a rezoning from no-use district to low-density residential district 2 for property generally described as being located north of the current terminus of Kyle Street. Committee recommends to approve in conjunction with annexation file 17AN004. Motion by Solomon, second by Drew. All in favor, we have Speaker Lisa Modrick.
Thank you, Mayor. I just need to understand a rezoning from a no use to a low density, just so I know why it was no use to begin with. If I could ask Dale Tech for an answer. Thank you.
Certainly, the property is not within the city of Rapid City, therefore it does not have a zoning designation. So when we bring it in, it is no use. So then after it's annexed, then it can be properly zoned to whatever the appropriate zoning designation is.
Okay, we have a motion on the floor for approval. All in favor of that motion, say aye. Aye. Opposed, say no. Motion carries. Item 83, second reading, ordinance 6177, and ordinance amending section 1706 of chapter 17 of the Rapid City Municipal Code. A request by KTM Design Solutions Incorporated for Salador Ranches Incorporated for rezoning from no-use district to low-density residential district for property generally described as being located west of the northernmost section of Prestwick Road. Committee recommends to approve in conjunction with annexation file 17AN003. Motion by Solomon, second by Modrick. All in favor of approval say aye. Aye. Opposed say no. Motion carries. Item number 84, second reading, ordinance number 6112, an ordinance to amend provisions concerning zoning applications by the city by amending section 17.54.040 of the Rapid City Municipal Code. Committee recommends approval. Okay, motion for approval from Scott.
Second.
Second by Estes. All in favor of approval say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Item 85. Appeal of Planning Commission's decision on a request by KTM Design Solutions Incorporated for Yanni Jorgis for initial plan development overlay to allow a townhome development for property generally described as being located southeast of the intersection of Overview Lane and Nugget Gulch Drive. Let's go to Lisa Modrick.
Thank you, Mayor. We had some residents that came in. They've spoken about this development option on this particular area, and I think if you've had a chance to drive out there, it is an awkward area, but it's got some pretty substantial value to the land and to the homes that are around it. And we've had a great response. This is the way we want our public to be, is to respond to what they feel should be in their city as well as in their neighborhoods. And I think we had more than enough saying that this could disturb our neighborhood. It could disturb how we've purchased and what's around us when we start talking about fourplexes and triplexes over duplexes or townhomes. So I have a concern with the neighbors when we're starting to expand and put that much density into a neighborhood that is a very small plot of land. We've talked about that on the Neighborhood Works project, which is a trial project to see what it's like to crunch into a neighborhood multi-units. But in this particular area, if you've had a chance to take a look at it, there could be better development for it than to do a fourplex or a triplex and put the pressure on the neighborhood and its infrastructure. And I just want to make sure we acknowledge that the people are here, and they've also spoken through emails and to letters stating their appeal to deny. And I appreciate their response.
Charity Doyle.
Thank you, Mayor. Could I get Vicki Fisher up again? I don't know if Kyle, are you representing? Okay. Maybe one of you can clear up. In one of the items, well, actually, in an email from Yanni, it says three units and one duplex. And then in this, it says 2 fourplexes and 1 twin home. Which is it?
I'll defer to Kyle.
Okay.
Yanni would like to request the 3 triplexes and the 1 duplex.
Thank you.
In an effort to lower the.
And each one would have one approach? Each unit would have one approach?
Each unit would have 1 approach and a 2-stall garage.
Okay. Vicky now, if I may. Can you speak to the pros and cons of, right now, with the ordinance change that was just approved, he can build 5 separate duplexes, correct?
We're going to use the term townhome because a duplex means that it could be one unit rented. A townhome is typically owner occupied. They're on an individual lot. And I think that goes to the audience and their comments that you've heard tonight. If you do a 2-unit townhome development, it's one step up from single-family residential development. That is the difference between low-density residential 2 and medium-density residential. It does limit the number of townhomes that can be connected to still fit into that residential, single-family home environment.
Okay, fair enough. Then with regard to 5 individual townhome units versus what Yanni is asking to build with this overlay, what could those neighbors expect, pros and cons wise, with approaches versus the amount of pavement that would be?
The street section, since Nugget Gulch is a collector, would still be the same. Okay. The approaches would be 10 instead of 11 into each of the individual driveways, and each lot would be required to have 2 off-street parking, just as if it were a single-family home. I think probably the biggest pro to having just 2 connecting units versus a structure that has 4 units that is connected is just the multi-family element of that one structure being 4 residences instead of 2. I think that in our community we see a good blend of single-family and 2-unit townhomes transition back and forth quite nicely. When we start going into 3 units and 4 units, that gets more of an apartment feel to a street, and I think that's the pushback you're hearing from this neighborhood.
Okay, I would agree with you on that. And so if I understand this right, if we were to deny this overlay, the overlay is really only for that extra unit and for building something greater than 2 units in a single structure. So if that were to be denied, he could still pull a building permit as soon as that ordinance change is published for the 20-day period and be able to start construction on 5 single townhome units.
Correct in the number discussion. There is also an exception to reduce the rear yard setback in this particular layout that went before the Planning Commission. If they could meet that rear yard setback, and the front yard setback is then reduced down as a result of, it would still maintain 25 feet as well. So I think that based on the dimensions of the lot, he could get the 25 front and back, and if that works for Kyle's client, and they put in 10 lots that are 4,000 square feet each, then it's just a building permit. The plan development goes away. By zoning it low-density residential 2, that has given that property owner the right to develop his property in that fashion.
Okay, I yield. Thank you.
John Roberts.
Thank you very much. I didn't realize I was in the queue, but since I'm in here, you know, I find this interesting because I think this is the way that government is supposed to work. I think this is the way that democracy is supposed to work. The thing that bothers me about this, because I believe this project, from what I'm hearing up there, there's probably support for it not to work. But what bothers me is we just talked about a project a minute ago that I had many of my constituents come forward to, and it fell on deaf ears on this council. So, you know, if this project does not go through for you, good for you, good for your neighborhood, but you're lucky that you live on the west side of Rapid instead of the north side of Rapid. So, thank you.
Jason Solomon.
Okay. Well, back to business. Vicki, can I ask you a question, please? Mr. Mayor, if that's all right.
Yes.
You know, in talking about the zoning of these 3-unit townhomes, so why is that restriction there in the first place?
So In low-density residential 2, it is very limiting in what it can allow. It's single-family or townhomes with no more than 2 units. If you do a conditional use permit within the low-density residential 2, meaning you have a public hearing, you bring the neighborhood in, you encourage this discussion, then you can have smaller lots and you can have more units. But as Mr. Roberts said, that's exactly why we have these meetings, is to see whether or not it's a good fit for that neighborhood. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. Are there any safety concerns as a part of that, or is this generally just a kind of typical zoning thing?
The building inspection and fire department ensures that all building and fire codes are met based on the number of units. Those do change up a little bit, and that's a part of the building permit.
Okay. If I could ask a question to Kyle from KTM. Thank you, Vicki. Kyle, so from what I understand, there's kind of a revision in this plan to kind of go from kind of the 3 or 4 unit structures, maybe at least to 3 3-unit structures and 2 2-unit townhomes. That's right.
Yeah, absolutely. So the original application had 2 4-unit townhomes put together. We've taken that down to the 3 3-units and then the one duplex, or the 1 2-unit townhome.
So from what I understand, if we were to do nothing and we had 5 2-unit townhomes, we'd have 10 townhomes, but really what we're asking for is 11 townhomes now.
Correct.
All right. But before it was about 15 or 16. I mean, you had several. You tell me, what was the original?
We had 11 units.
It was always 11
It was
units.
the 4 and the 4 and a 2. So really, it's just a change in the appearance. So instead of having the 4 units connected, is you're going to be bringing it down to the 3 to kind of break up that line and really give it a better appearance from the street.
Some of the concerns of the homeowners, which I think we all can understand as those of us who own homes, is that these townhomes may affect their property values negatively. And can you tell us about the quality of these townhomes, the kind of the plans that are in place? Are these going to be bottom shelf, top shelf? Tell us a little bit more about what's planned there.
Sure. I'm going to run back and just grab we have a rendition that shows what is proposed, so I'll put that up real quick.
At 2 minutes, so you better run. Okay.
I might need some help, Vicki, turning on the... So this first one is the duplex unit. And these are going to be nicer townhome units, upgraded exterior finishes, much similar to what this developer has built in the area, throughout the Stony Creek area. And here is the triplex option. Same type of finishes, stone outside, lap board siding, dual stall garages.
Are those driveways long enough to hold additional cars?
Yes,
One of the
they
concerns
will.
was on-street parking.
So we have a 25-foot setback because this is a collector street. That's going to push these units farther in, giving us even a little more driveway space than you'd have in a typical driveway.
Okay. All right. That's all I have for now. Thanks, Kyle.
Thank you.
Charity Doyle.
Thank you. Could I get one of the residents, I don't care whom, to come up to the podium? Thank you, sir. Can you tell me your name again?
Mike Gallagher.
Mike, thank you. So I know you've studied this issue. You obviously have a vested interest. When you think about what the developer can legally build there and have the 5 townhome units with 5 driveways coming in and out of that stretch of road, I'm very familiar with that area, versus what the applicant is actually proposing with this overlay, what do you feel most comfortable with?
I think it's going to be a challenge to go anything in that particular area, just the way the hillside is. You know, that's my honest opinion about it. Whether it's whether it's 3, 3, 2, or 1, I don't think you get the 5 duplexes in there.
Well, I may agree, but we are going to end up delving into property rights, so we're going to have to be a little careful with that one. But if you know something's going to be constructed there, I mean, and this is not going to, I'm not going to, you know, hold you to this. I'm just trying to get a feel. I mean, it'd be more like along Benton Drive in that transition versus the multi-unit structures.
You know, I guess I'd prefer the 5.2s versus the 3, 3, 3.
Okay, thank you. If anyone else would like to pop up real quick and just give like 10 second, that'd be fine. If not, okay, we have one more. Thank you, sir. What's your name?
Nick Spain.
Nick.
And me and my wife, we actually live directly across from the proposed units.
Okay.
And in our opinion, if it was to be developed, we would rather have the 5 just townhouses.
Okay. Thank you, sir, for your bravery. I know it's.
You should see him ride a motorcycle.
Oh, yeah?
Lisa Modrick.
I still have the floor, and one
Oh,
other person's
thought
coming
you were
up.
done. Go
Mr.
ahead.
Mayor. And Ms. Titsey.
Thank you. An easy name to remember. I prefer the 5 double units versus the multiple units.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I yield.
Okay, Lisa Modrick.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd like to make a motion to, and I never get this right, to uphold the appeal. I would like it to sustain as the low, medium 1 and 2. So if I can say this properly, so it doesn't have the overlay on it, I would like to. Thank you, that's what I thought. I'm denying the appeal to approve. Did I get it right?
You want to
Like the
approve,
land use to be as it exists today, as we had just done with our low 1 and 2.
You're trying to deny the overlay.
Deny
Lisa, you're trying to deny the overlay.
Exactly right.
I would encourage you to make a motion to deny the planned overlay.
Thank you. So moved.
okay, we have a motion to
Second.
deny the planned overlay with a second from Charity Doyle. All in favor of denying the planned overlay, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? No. Okay. Motion passes with 1 no. Now we're going to go backwards and. Pardon me?
Yeah, what does item?
Oh, we're gonna.
Yeah, 63. Not really.
Going back to do item 63 at this time. Request by KTM Design Solutions for Yanni Jorgas for preliminary subdivision plan for proposed lot A, B, C, and D of Stony Creek South, number 2 subdivision, generally described as being located southeast of the intersection of Overview Lane and Nugget Gulch Road. Lisa Modrick.
Thank you, Mayor. I just want to clarify now, since we had denied the appeal, but now we have 63 with Lot A, B, and C with the subdivision, and we don't have the overlay. How do we move forward with this approval with stipulations that have been requested? It is going to probably need to be answered by Kyle or by Vicki.
Vicki.
Do you mind if I ask Vicki that question?
Please do.
Thank you. Vicki, I need some details on this part. Thank you.
Okay, so as I indicated preliminarily, that if the plan development goes away and the zoning of low-density residential 2 is approved by council, then they could come in with 10 lots, not 11, but 10. Each one would have to be a minimum of 4,000 square feet, and it takes off the table that any setback reduction. They'll have to meet those now. So my suggestion would be that the preliminary subdivision plan be approved as identified in the staff report, but with the added stipulation that in lieu of 11 lots, a maximum of 10 lots be approved, and that the lot size and dimension be in compliance with Chapter 1750-040 of the Rapid City Municipal Code, and that is the townhome development section.
Charity Doyle.
And I will make that motion. Do I have to repeat everything?
Is everyone clear with the motion?
Thank you.
Okay, so we have a motion by Doyle and a second by Richie Nordstrom. Okay, all in favor of that motion, say aye. Aye. Opposed, say no. Motion passes. Now we're going back again to item number 86, which is the bill list. We'll go to Finance Officer Pauline Sumption.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. There are no additions to the bill list, so the total is that which is attached at $8,062,023.77.
Okay, motion for approval by Doyle, second by Scott. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say no. Motion carries. Need a motion. We have two motions to go into executive session by Doyle and Scott. All in favor of going into executive session, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Okay, we are in executive session.
Motion.
May I have a motion to come out of executive session?
Second.
Motion by Charity Doyle and second by Amanda Scott. We're now back in session. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye, we're back in session.
Motion to adjourn.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to adjourn. All in favor? We're adjourned.
Nay.